see design as a tool, and I like when the tools I use do what they're supposed to do and they do it well.
For those who don't know, Alejandro Rodriguez is a Brooklyn-based graphic designer creating memorable brands and experiences as a co-founder and director of Toil Studio. Alejandro and I met at a Collins event in New York City back in October. And I came from Toronto specifically for that event. And my goal coming to New York for that trip was to meet as many designers as I could. And so while I was at this event, I approached Alejandro because I had this feeling that he was a designer. And not only was I right in him being a designer, but he's a really great one. And he was nice enough to entertain me and even give me some advice as a recent grad. And one of the things that stood out to me is he said that in order to be a successful designer, you have to have a unique perspective. With this in mind, I'd love to welcome you to Hidden Characters, Alejandro, and open by asking you, what is Toil Studio and what is its unique perspective?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Jack. Toil is a small creative studio where we work with growing brands to craft visual identities, launch websites, and produce visual content. Toil is something I co-founded with two other friends, Danny and Manish. We all have different backgrounds in the creative industry, and we noticed there was kind of like a growing appetite for smaller, more nimble studios. So we took the leap and started Toil. And when it comes to the unique perspective, I think it comes from our combined experiences, knowing that each project has its own unique set of challenges to solve for. And it's important for us to have a point of view on how to guide the project to success. I think sharing our point of view with clients better positions us to be more of a strategic creative partner.
Yeah, I love that. And the next question I have for you, Alejandro, is from watching the content that you make around your design practice, I noticed that you always describe your clients as partners. I'd love to know about your experience building relationships with clients and how you collaborate with non-designers to produce great design work.
Yeah, I mean, yes, our clients are clients, but we kind of see them as partners. Some of our clients, we actually work as an embedded creative team. So we're in their Slack channels, we work very close with them. So we're in the loop of every upcoming project they have. And, the goal is, yes, deliver great quality work, but it's also kind of building that connection and trust. I think it's important for them to feel like that they feel like we care, that they feel like that we're kind of rooting for their success. Because ultimately, if they succeed, we succeed. When it comes to building a relationship with a client, I try not to overthink it. At the end of the day, it's someone who has a problem. They're likely stressed out about it, and they're just looking for someone to help them figure it out. And when it comes to the best experiences I had, whether it's hiring a mechanic or visiting a really nice hotel, it wasn't just about fixing the problem. There was a sense of care and hospitality, and they asked the right questions. They listened to my concerns. It made me feel like I was in good hands. And I think that's what I try to build with my clients, especially for the clients who are non-designers. I think a good collaboration starts with the quality of questions and providing clear next steps on what to expect so the client feels like you know what you're doing. This all kind of builds trust and leads to better quality work.
That's great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The next question I have for you, Alejandro, gets more into the work. I like to say complexity is easy and simplicity is hard. I'm always impressed with designers who are able to achieve distinctiveness while maintaining an aesthetic quality and do so in only a few visual moves. I consider you one of the people who's able to do that well. So I want to ask, what about your process do you attribute to being able to make work with this minimal but visually engaging quality?
That's a great question. I've always leaned into more simple and functional design. And I think it's because I see design as a tool. And I like when the tools I use do what they're supposed to do and they do it well. I like when each element serves a purpose. And I think for my process, it starts with like first understanding what's the big idea I'm trying to communicate and kind of build that momentum to explore as many iterations as I can. I keep on going until something feels right, and finding the right solution isn't like a straightforward process. It requires a lot of grit and to push through all the bad ideas to eventually find the good ones. And finding the good ones kind of comes back to the importance of having a point of view, having the experience to have the right taste to know what's feeling like a good idea and what solves the brief is a big challenge. It's more of like a high craft approach. And after doing it for 10 years, it seems to be working for me.
Yeah, from the outside, it seems to be working too. The next question I have, Alejandro sort of builds on this, but gets more specifically into some of the logo work I'd love to talk to you about. And so, when it comes to the distinctiveness and aesthetic qualities that I see and appreciate in your work, those two traits are something that overlap with your five-part guide to creating great logos. So, I'm wondering if you could talk about those five parts and maybe how you see the role of a logo today and maybe how it's changed over time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The five traits were recognizable. Is it simple enough that people can remember it? Distinctive, does it stand out against your competitors? Functional, is it easy to use? Relevant, does it reflect the current and future vision of other brands? And the fifth one is a bit of a throwaway. Is it cool? If you put it on a tote bag, would anyone want it? But I think about like the role of a logo, I think it really hasn't changed. It still serves as like the primary identifier for brands, but I do feel like logos take less the burden these days. Visual identities are so complex now. There are other ways for brands to be identifiable, whether it's through illustrations, photography, iconography, or color. Logos are still important, but they're just a smaller part in the larger system. It's funny, when I first started designing logos like a decade ago, and learning how to design visual identities, I would just take the same logo and just apply to like every piece of collateral. And I'm like, oh, here's your visual identity. And that's just not the case. But what I love about designing logos is there's subtle room for visual communication. And so combining like a brand's big idea into something simple, memorable is a very fun challenge.
I love that. I like how you mentioned that in your early days, you'd sort of stamp the logo on everything and call that a visual identity. But you sort of learned over time that sort of a visual identity can, for one, be identifiable from other elements, but also is just a grander kind of scheme. So I'm curious, where in the process do you focus on the logo mark itself? Is it early on? Does something else have to be established first? And what would make it vary?
Yeah, yeah. I think after the general creative direction is identified, typically done after brand strategy, the logo is what I start with, mostly because it's the most enjoyable part of designing identity. I do start with
What happened to
sketching.
save the best for last?
Yeah, I mean, I know, but like I just love just like immediately jumping in. It's probably not best practice, but like it's what I love to do. I do start with sketching and I do kind of gather visual inspiration, kind of matches the tone I'm going for. But it's also thinking about what is the brand's big idea? What are some visual cues that we can introduce that feels fresh and ownable? It can be an object, an animal. It can be more typographic. I think this is where the kind of the I think this is where the rapid iteration comes in, where I can kind of get into a flow state and just hope that I discover an idea. It might take 5 minutes, it might take 5 hours. And when I have like a handful of directions feeling pretty good, that's when I start exploring color, photography, and typography.
I love that. And you sort of anticipated my next question, Alejandro. When the time comes where pen needs to meet paper, is pen literally meeting paper for you? Are you somebody who sketches in a very analog way? And sort of what needs to happen before you open design tools and sort of what fidelity is your idea in before you're pushing any anchor points?
I do start with sketching, but it's like very loose. I do an initial brainstorming session, but it might take like only 15 minutes. And then I normally just jump straight into Illustrator. I do go back and forth between computer and Notepad, but I do iterate way quicker in Illustrator. I do think back of the early days where I would sketch a logo to a very high fidelity, scan it, put it in Illustrator, like put grids and everything. And that took hours. It took like hours to explore one idea. And that's just not the case. I'm just more fluid when it comes to my process. But I'm also like a visual thinker. You know, a lot of my ideas when it comes to logos, I think about while doing the dishes, walking the dog. And when something comes up, that's when I kind of jump on the notepad, do a quick proof of concept. If it's feeling good, then I jump back into Illustrator.
I love that. And I noticed that one way that you categorize your logo designs, Alejandro, is by either geometric or organic. I'm curious, does your design process change depending on which direction you're moving towards?
I think the brief and the goal of the project kind of ultimately decides if a brand wants to appear more handcrafted, then maybe the logo feels a little more handmade. If a brand wants to appear more serious or mature, maybe the logo is more geometric and simple. But it's also important to recognize like these are like safe ways of thinking and to explore ideas that challenge those assumptions when they zig, you zag kind of thing. So building on the second trait, what makes a great logo is the logo distinctive. And it's good to kind of do an audit of competitors to see what are they doing so you can do something different. But yeah, my work does vary, but the quality never changes.
I love that. I might use that motto.
Yeah, yeah.
And so also building on the checklist. So when I think about that checklist, I think about it in the sense of like my macro factors in terms of like stepping back and sort of like bird's eye view of whether your logo is passing some of these stress tests. But I'm curious on a more micro craft level, if there's things that you are stress testing your logos for. You know, you hear people talk about using the golden ratio, doing all your optical compensations, even stuff as nitty-gritty as like the Pagendorf effect. I'm curious how you think about those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's not a checklist. I mean, those are important things to keep in mind. I do think back the first logo I was ever hired to design. This was well over a decade ago. I actually used the golden ratio to design a logo for HVAC company, and they still use it. So I'm not sure if there's like truth to that, but that was the first and only time I've ever used the golden ratio for a logo. But when it comes to like optical adjustments, like those are important. The quality of spacing and sizing sometimes comes down to experience. Knowing when something isn't feeling right and making those adjustments until it like looks perfect takes a lot of persistence. I mean, there have been logos that I spent hours trying to create the perfect proportions for a logo lockup. Even though that takes a lot of time, I know that when I deliver that project, it's, in my opinion, perfect.
Yeah, I love that. But I also want to ask you, Alejandro, about sort of the idea of icons as a system. I know as part of some visual identities, you get tasked with creating sort of a series of icons. And I'm curious if there's anything about your process that changes knowing that something needs to work as a series. And when you think about sort of serializing some like an icon, like what traits do you think about to make it consistent? Are you thinking about like making the caps the same, sort of the negative space the same? Like, I'm curious what's in your mind.
Yeah, most projects need some sort of icons, and whether they're more simple or more illustrative. I try to identify like basic design rules, whether it's like consistent line weight, corner radius, or fill color. Um, I try not to overthink it because similar to logos, they're just meant to represent like a single idea. But it makes me think we are wrapping up a project that we were tasked to design over 100 icons. And what we pitched is to redesign their icons to reflect the geometry or the design language of their logo. They liked it. And so now that logo kind of served as the general reference on how every icon is designed.
Even if you don't consciously pick up on those things, there's a level of care that you sort of subconsciously
It's
pick up.
almost like um, it's the things that people don't notice. It's those little design features, the little design thinking. And even though like end of the day, nobody might notice that connection, but when it comes to finding a reason or why something is designed the way it is, having a bit of like a benchmark of like this is the why. And so when there's a clear why, it makes doing all the work very, very easy.
So my next question, Alejandro, leads on that idea of making decisions in a logo process that are less arbitrary. I saw you post that your toxic trait is that you try to fit all your logos into a sort of geometric grid. And
Yep.
so we share a toxic trait because I'm also very guilty of trying to do that. But I wanted to ask you, when you're deciding on a grid, that you want to use as sort of a reference point for a logo, or even sort of coming up with sort of spacing decisions between the logo and maybe subtext or any other elements it would be paired with. How do you make some of those spacing decisions less arbitrary?
Yeah, to be honest, it always feels very arbitrary. Not all logos need to fit within like a perfect grid. I think most times it's just like an easy way to figure out proportions and spacing of elements. And for example, if I'm working on a logo type and there is like a supporting description underneath it, How do I decide how far away those elements should be? I can either just like optically do it, but for me, I can't do that. I need some kind of reason, some kind of rule. So I'll take, say, 50% of the height, the logo type, that 50% of the height, I'll use that as a spacing between those two elements. And then I'll duplicate it over. I'll zoom out to see if it's either too tight or too loose. If it's too tight, I'll do 75% of the height of the logo type and so on. I do the same thing over and over again until the spacing feels kind of perfect. This helps to remove a lot of the guesswork.
I love that. And that's quite reassuring for me because sometimes when I'm doing sort of like doing that like half and then quarter, I feel like, man, am I just doing this for like, is this completely arbitrary? So I'm glad that I'm
It's
not
yeah,
alone.
it feels super arbitrary. And like, I don't know if it adds any value, but it makes me think, okay, if another designer got this logo and they were picky and they put my logo in some kind of a grid, I like to think that they're like, oh, there's some consideration of the spacing out, and they would appreciate that. But chances are that's never going to happen. And so those small de details kind of get lost, but I like to think it makes me sleep better at night.
I think so too. Especially when you do the logo reveal and you like show the grid, the
Right.
non-designers are like, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh wow, it's great.
Um, well, I want to get into some questions about your specific logo work, Alejandro. I'm curious if there's a logo that you've made that you're particularly proud of, and whether it was because you think it addressed the brief very well, or maybe any other reasons. And I personally gravitate to the ones that you've made for Hook and Arrow, as well as the Frank Collective F Mark. I love those logos that sort of feel like dynamic, like they have the curves, but then they also feel resolved with sort of like the sharpness and very sort of optically even, like balanced, a balanced feeling to them. And so, yeah, I'm curious if you have one mark that you've made that you're particularly proud of.
Yeah, I think I think my favorite logos are the ones that I have like an aha moment. The logo that comes to mind is a logo I did for a tennis program for a nonprofit called Advantage Lancaster. We've been working together since I think 2018, and they asked me to design the logo for their program. I said yes, and through the early explorations, there's like the kind of the generic tennis rackets kind of cross, like nothing really ownable. And Advantage Lancaster is based in Lancaster, where I grew up. And so Lancaster City is known as the Red Rose City. And when I was doing some sketching and everything, I noticed that the some of the geometry of the tennis ball matched the geometry of like a rose petal. And I was like, oh, like that was like an aha moment. And like kind of sketched it out and they built it out in Illustrator. And the final mark is like just literally a simple tennis ball with like rose petals around it. And it's one of my favorite logos to date because it feels like so simple, but it's like, oh, it's that perfect blend of like it's very ownable, but there's like some subtle visual communication. I think those are my favorite logos.
I love that. When you have that sort of simplicity, but it's also something ownable, I think if you can walk that line, you've done something great.
Yeah, yeah.
So beyond your work, Alejandro, I want to ask if there's any logo designer, dead or alive, who you really appreciate their work.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, there's a ton of logo designers who I appreciate, but I think one that comes to mind is a designer who influenced me a ton in the early stages of my career, and that's Aaron Draplin. He's one of the first designers who inspired me to kind of really open up about my process, and I remember watching him speak, and I was like, oh, he's kind of like me. He's kind of like this like rugged dude, just like designing logos, and I love that so much. And actually, to the right of me there's a poster of his, the space shuttle poster. And then to the left is a poster of logos from another designer who I really admire. Her name's Jay Fletcher. And so I feel like these two posters are constantly in my viewpoint as I design, and both of these kind of really influence the work I make.
I love that. Whether from them or not, Alejandro, I want to know beyond your favorite logo designer, is there a favorite, do you have a favorite individual mark of all time?
Yeah, that's very difficult. I don't think I can ever answer that confidently, but I think one logo that comes to mind. So I grew up skateboarding, and a lot of my creative influences were from skate culture. And there's a skateboarding brand called Girl, and their logo is literally like the bathroom woman's like silhouette sign. And a time where there were so many skate decks that were super crazy and illustrative, they just use the same icon and logo over and over again. And as a designer, I just like love that consistency. It's so simple and so recognizable that they make these cool statues of that girl logo and they have artists use them as canvases. And actually, the skate deck over my shoulder is from a skate deck from Girl and features one of the statues done by Ed Templeton.
Wow, I love that. Well, Alejandro, those are all the questions I had for you. And a tradition of the show is that in closing, in the spirit of why the show started, which is to give recognition to graphic designers doing great work, I always ask the guests if they have anybody they want to shout out or who they think would be an interesting guest they would want to see on the show. And maybe in the spirit of this episode where we did a lot of logo talk, maybe you can shout out a logo designer as well as a sort of a designer in general who you think is doing great work.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, I mean, it's tough because, I'm fortunate that living in Brooklyn, I'm surrounded by amazing talent every day. But the two names that come to mind is a designer, a really great guy. His name's Johnny Mosek. He's a brand identity designer. And then another designer is one of the co-founders of Toil. His name's Manish. He's a great digital designer, and I think both of them would be awesome guests on your show.
Well, if you're listening, I'd love to have you guys on. And with that, Alejandro, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing some thoughts. Is there anything you want to promote, and where can people find you and Toil?
Yeah, I guess I can use this as like a shameless plug to promote Toil. Follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Toil Studio, no spaces. And then you can follow me on Instagram, alejandro.rod.me. I post work and all things design.
Amazing. Well, with that, Alejandro, thanks again and take care.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.
Hey, Jack here. Wanted to say thank you for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Alejandro where we talked all things logo design. I have another one on the way, so keep an eye out for that by subscribing. And if you like the episode, leave a like. Definitely gives me some encouragement to keep these coming. And if there's anybody you want to see featured, and if you like the new format I tried in this episode where there's the timestamps, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.